Okay, so today on our show we have Allison Graham. So Rob, tell us a bit more about Allison and how you met and what we're going to be hearing from her today.
Great, thank you, Pascal. I went to a conference called CAPS, Canadian Association of Public Speakers, in London, Ontario, last December 2019. And it brings together speakers from all walks of life to be able to share experiences, share insights, best practices. It's a 3-day event. It was my first time, but obviously there are people that go back every single year. And at that event, I met Allison, who we're going to meet today. And I was very intrigued because she's talking about an area of business where pre-COVID-19 I thought was really critical. It's called resilience. And how do we make ourselves more resilient? How do we look, first of all, inward at how we react to things, and then how do we look at, through different models that she'll explain today, ways we can approach what the actual problem really is. And Allison will walk us through those in a very personal way too, because she'll be telling stories about her own adversity and how she managed to deal with it. And she does so in a very, very honest, authentic way. So I think that's very helpful. The topic, of course, I don't think could be more timely right now than leaders, their teams, employees in the organization, dealing with it both professionally and, of course, personally. So it's going to be a treat to talk to Allison. A little bit of a bio on her as well. Lives in London, Ontario. Is a keynote speaker. Also works with organizations on this topic, leadership team. So she has been working in this field for about 8-9 years. She's on Global News Radio London, every Tuesday. You can find her on Allison at allisongraham.co. And she's written several books, one of which I think speaks directly to this topic, Married to My Mom. What's the byline on that one, Pascal?
Married my mom, birthed a dog, how to be resilient when life sucks.
I think that it's just for that alone, you've got to buy the book. So it'll be a very, very, it'll be a fascinating and very engaging time we're spending with Allison.
Thanks for that intro, Rob. And we really want to thank Allison ahead of time for doing this for us. So learn from these tools and apply these tools with you and your team. Okay.
Thank you. So good morning, Pascal St-Jean with me. We are meeting today with Allison Graham from London, Ontario. Allison, how are you doing this morning?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thanks for taking the time to be a guest. Especially when I think our times, it's funny, some people are saying we seem to have some more time. I feel like we're being compressed even more right now. The schedules they're very upended during this very difficult time. So I do appreciate the time you took today. And Allison is here. As a point of reference, I met Allison a few months ago at a convention called the CAPS Convention, Canadian Association of Public Speakers. My first time there, but Allison's a veteran. I'm not dating you age-wise, but I'm just saying you're a veteran. You've been there before at these, and this was my first time. So I was wide-eyed walking through the convention, trying to really navigate through so much great content, so many amazing people. And we had a chance to talk, and her topic really, your topic struck me way before we had any idea what coronavirus was. So much so that we decided we wanted to do something with you as regards to STAND, and because Allison is talking about something that is so critical, and everybody now is being tested, and it's on the topic of resilience. So immediately I decided to reach back out to you and I want you to share your insights of basically what are we all going through? How do we find our best selves? How do we also appreciate that there's anxiety, those are all very, very natural emotions, but would love to hear about you. So my first question is, how are you doing?
I'm well. I'm practicing every tool I have in my resiliency toolkit. And, it's interesting because I think, Rob, when you and I talked, even at the convention, I was so excited to work with you because you really had a true respect and appreciation for how important resilience is. And I think 3.5 weeks ago, resilience wasn't a topic that people just wanted to have on the tip of their tongue, right? Like I had to go into companies and say, listen, it's going to help your performance and help people deal with obstacles. And it's like a really great foundational skill. And now people are coming to me going, oh, right, I think you were right. We need to talk about resilience. And this is a whole new level of resilience. And there's so many pieces of the puzzle. And I think we can help people for sure to feel more empowered and more confident and more hopeful during a time when the entire world seems to be in chaos and just uncharted territory.
Right. How so true. And personally feeling the same thing. I'm sure Pascal is too. The feeling that we're not in much control right now. And I think that's probably one aspect of where resilience has to kick in. And obviously over the course of time, there's periods in our life when we don't have as much control, but this one is universal. Is that a fundamental aspect of learning to be resilient when you know you've got to let go sometimes?
You do. And so I think before we're done here in this call, I want to share with you how you figure out what's within your control out of control. But I think right now it's important to recognize that generally when people go through an adversity, which is a catastrophic external force that will forever change the way you know your life to be. Okay? When we look at our teams, we generally have one or two people in the office, if it's a large team, who are experiencing an adversity at a time. And so but then what they can do is they can do things like bury themselves in work to try to ignore their worst feelings, right? They can look to somebody else, look to their leadership to feel strength and borrow a little bit of strength while they're grieving, while they're going through a catastrophic diagnosis. So those typical resources that we use in resilience are no longer there because we're all in this together. And that fundamentally shifts how some people are responding, because the tools and the coping mechanisms that, by the way, aren't that actually effective, right? Because they're externally driven supports as opposed to internally driven supports are not there. So people who have not gone through an adversity on their own in isolation, and I don't mean physical isolation, but feeling like walking through a room and kind of having the sensation of, why are you guys all so happy when I'm so miserable and grieving about something going on? Now everybody's grieving. Everybody's in it together. And it's a different world.
Right. May I ask you then, so this topic is so critical right now. But you did mention earlier that, maybe 3 weeks ago, I had to go and sell this a little bit. A lot of people didn't know how to connect all the dots between the importance of resilience and, say, the fundamental health of their leaders and their whole organization, what that brings to build a better company. But how did you even come across this material? Like, what was it about your life that brought you here?
Well, it was a decade of hell. And I can laugh at that now because I went through, and I affectionately refer to it as my decade of hell. So what happened was I first lost my dad, which is a very normal life experience, except I didn't have coping mechanisms. And so what it did was my instinct was bury myself in my work. And then I burned out. Next thing you know, I ended up having surgeries that caused neuropathic pain. I went from working and burying myself in work to I was proud that I did 18-hour days, right? And then I went to having 2 to 5 hours of functionality and sometimes weeks at a time where I couldn't get off the couch. Mm-hmm. And that, I was a business owner. My doctors told me to go on disability. Other things ended up happening, injuries, deaths, etc. And I was like, no, there's got to be another way. And I got so focused on trying to figure out an answer to resilience. And what I found were a lot of phrases that I didn't feel were effective for me. So, and I'm seeing a lot of this out there in the world right now. And I just want to say, like, please stop saying that. Like things like, we'll bounce back. No, we won't. Because what was no longer exists. So we can't bounce back, because bouncing back is trying to get back to the way it was. Our world will never know a way without COVID-19.
Mhm.
Like it fundamentally shifts everything. And the way I look at a diversity, and I think this is really important, because we have challenges, we have adversities, obstacles, and we have the tasks we need to get done. And so what often happens is, like, when it comes down to task management, that's our productivity. And there we just want to look at efficiencies. So when I was going through my worst time, I often make the joke that when I had 2 to 5 hours of functionality a day, I was actually more productive and had more thoughtful, profitable output in that limited capacity than I do now some days when I'm able-bodied again and, feeling so resilient, so it does make a difference. So those are our tasks. And I think right now with our tasks, the things we need to do, you would imagine this if you and I, like the three of us, decided to go on a walk down a path. And of course we'd be 3 to 6 feet apart. So it's a wide path. And the task is simply walking down it and getting to the other end of the path. Okay, so those are our tasks, and we want to do it as efficiently as possible. Obstacles are, we're walking on the path and now we've got a log down in front of us. Our job, because our goal is to continue on our path, is to figure out, am I going to go over it, under it, around it, blow it up, move it out of the way? We don't sit on the log, right, and hug the log and get obsessed with this log. It's just an obstacle that we are paid to deal with in our business.
Right.
Then an adversity is very different. An adversity is, we're walking on the path, there's an earthquake, and all of a sudden in front of us is a sinkhole.
Mm-hmm.
And that sinkhole means that the path we were on no longer exists. And so us trying to bounce back to the path we were on is impossible. And it will actually hurt our healing. So
how do we,
go ahead.
how do we, I suppose right now going through COVID-19, we realize the sinkhole was right there. There are different adversities we're going to face. This one, to your point earlier, it's universal. And we're not going to go back to where we were. So we're going to have to learn different methodologies, is it? Or set different expectations? Is that what it's going to look like?
It will. And we don't really know what it's going to look like. And I think part of it is being open to the fact that the path isn't there. Like, so the more we have our teams or ourselves trying to stay on the path we were on without accepting the fact that we're facing a sinkhole,
Mm-hmm.
is time spent away from our healing and our adapting and finding that new path. How do we build that bridge to get somewhere over on the other side? But here's how this works. In our lives, we have tasks, obstacles, adversity. And the task inappropriately dealt with will create obstacles. Too many obstacles create adversity in the form of a burnout. So that's the conversation I would have been having 3.5 weeks ago with companies. If we don't get people totally efficient and doing the absolute best way, and not like stop doing, oh, but that's how we've always done it, and feeling like connected to the thing we do it and this is how we do it, then we're going to create new obstacles. And if we don't allow people to get totally solution focused and give them the tools so that they can remove all the extra BS and drama around those obstacles, then your company is going to suffer. And if your company suffers too much, we're going to have an adversity, and the adversity is going to be that you're going to go out of business.
Right.
Or you're going to have a whole bunch of people on stress leave, or you're going to have, now we're working at reverse. We've got an adversity.
Yeah.
But where we have control is figuring out from that adversity where I have zero control. what new obstacles are created out of it?
So this is really where, if we start with the leadership teams in companies, of course it's going to affect everybody, and we are looking for some answers. Even if all the information is very incomplete, we still have to come up with plans, and it's likely they're coming up continually with a plan, and then we have a plan B almost the next day because new news has come out. How do we manage the speed of what the information we're getting? That in the last week, when we really think about it, about 10 days ago, a lot of us were going out for dinner and flying, and I know I was traveling up until 10 days ago, or even less, and now we're pretty much sequestered in very small spaces, and every day we seem to be learning new stuff. How tough is it when the adversity and the obstacles are popping up as fast as our plan?
Well, it means you need to be even more agile. And of course, there's some challenge to that, but recognizing the challenge and recognizing your tendencies and your patterns. See, when we go through adversity, what happens is it highlights our patterns, and sometimes those are bad habits or barriers to performance, we might call them. So if you're a worrier, like if you were a worrier 3.5 weeks ago, and you're in a COVID-19 crisis with the rest of us, obviously, and your business is in peril, and your worry, if we don't get that under control, is going to take over everything and is going to cloud your judgment and your ability to be solution focused. If you are someone who is resistant to change, if 3.5 weeks ago you would have said to me, Allison, this is how we always do it, then your ability to go, how can we do it now, is going to be magnified. The trouble with that will be magnified. So this is where we can't have our personal judgment. We can't sit here and look at, we have to look at it very clearly. So the first thing I want everybody to do is sit down and write down the adversity on paper in black and white. Let's get it out there. And it might be COVID-19 as a overarching, but from that, what's your business's adversity? I get enough cash flow for a month. I got enough cash flow for 2 days, right? Or I've got a year to ride this out. Or I was planning on sharing the company or succeeding the company in 3 months from now. And now I've got, my succession plan is out the window, and I'm sure as heck not going to another country to retire. I want you to write down exactly what your situation is.
I have a question.
From that point,
with that,
Rob.
I was going to ask from that point, and as we look at leadership teams to start with, they have their own personal adversity, and then they have their business adversity. Are you looking for them to share both, or we're focused on the business one?
I don't think you can separate. I don't think you can separate. And I would say that this is an exercise you could do as a team. This is also an exercise I want you to do when you're done watching this video on a pen and paper by yourself. And actually, let's go through it together. I'm going to put on my whiteboard if you're open to that. And
Please.
I can share this. So let's start with what is your adversity. And this could be, there are many potentially that are on the go for you right now. Whatever you write there doesn't matter. But see, the beauty is in this model and your tasks. Your level of control that you have is very low with adversity.
Right.
It's very high with your tasks. And it's mediocre with your obstacles. Okay? But I'm going to say more positive control than negative control.
Okay.
This flows upwards. So your tasks, as I mentioned earlier, if you have too many of them, they're not done efficiently or not done well, then they create obstacles. Too many obstacles create adversity. This also comes down. So for example, when I had my surgeries, I was told to go on disability and I had neuropathic pain. To me, that was an adversity, which then created new obstacles. every obstacle, once we figure out solution, creates additional tasks. So first thing we do, we write down our adversity. Okay, so COVID-19, and from there, what gets so crystal clear about what that does to you. For me, that meant that my absolute best quarter in 14 years of business just blew up by Friday night at 10 o'clock of last.
Right.
Because I go to companies and I speak. I had training contracts 3 months in a row to help management teams figure out how to be resilient. Now, hopefully, okay, so that's number one. So cash flow. I think the one thing on people's mind is cash flow. This is trouble.
Very much.
Okay. So now we go, what are the obstacles? Oh, sorry. Look at me even going ahead of my own stuff, because that is the adversity. The obstacle is cash flow.
Yeah.
And see, an obstacle, remember, is a log in our path. If we treat an obstacle as if it's an adversity, we don't have hope. We can't turn a log into a sinkhole.
Right.
So I'm asking you on a pen and paper to separate the two. Here's an adversity. What am I feeling? My number one priority here is healing. As the kids might say, feel the feels.
Yeah.
Feel the feels.
Like
the
that.
Fear, the anger, the uncertainty, the shaking of the ground. You know, the challenge with those tough emotions is that we as leaders often bury them by working harder.
Yes.
And the work harder is not there right now, and actually will be a problem if you're trying to be a workaholic right now. Okay. So that's feeling. We have to separate these. Here, our number one priority is getting solution focused. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, how we get solution focused. And tasks, when we go here, so the cash flow issue is, let's say if you're in Canada and you're blessed to be here, I think, you know, there are a lot of programs. We don't necessarily know how we're going to get the money, but for businesses, they're promising help. So your task for that is, can I research granting options?
Right.
Can I put a stop payment or make arrangements and deferrals on some of my bills or things that are available? Can I cancel payments? I mean, we hate to do that to the economy, but how do I tighten my own belt? Okay. So do you see how this works, this format? If we're only focusing up here, mind is mush,
Right.
overwhelmed, we can't do anything. I want you to sit down and pull this into as deep and granular a level, because each one of these you can go, this is number one, this is number two, this is number three, or whatever order you want to put them in.
Yep.
And in the time when you're able to focus, and I find that when you accept and are okay that this needs to happen and stop beating yourself up about it,
Right.
you're going to free up a little bit more bandwidth to get A, B, C, D done.
So let me ask you, I love the model because there's a quote from a statistician who was a 20th century very well known in the mathematics world. His name was George E.P. Box, and he said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I'm looking.
Well, you know, I just made this one up, so he may be very right.
Well, because I tell clients all the time, I'm going to show you models, and to tell you the truth, you can find reasons why it won't work, but it's all based on us. In other words, if we're prepared to go through this is a great model, but it really does require us to take the time. So let's say there's a leadership team, 3-4 people, small company,
yeah.
And they all start this process, but they start to they have their own personal obstacles. And how do we, and earlier you did mention, I totally understand it. Normally, under normal circumstances, a couple of people anywhere in a team might be having problems, and we have all these other resources to help us, including each other. what is it like right now when we're all going through it? So is there ways we lean on each other differently, even with this model? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, everything is a bit different for sure. I mean, I think everything's a lot different because the people who are the stalwarts who you're looking towards, even if they're showing up, what I'm seeing is a lot of reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so people are taking ownership when they're not ready to take ownership. Right? Like, so, even like the moms, right? There's a lot of mom talk right now. And, they're trying to do everything for their family. Right? And dads too, by the way. I mean, if this is your personality, and actually, I want to share with you 2 more models that I think are going to help you.
Please.
And then we'll come back to specifically answer this question.
Great.
Those obstacles, I want you to think of them as an ice cube. Okay? So we've got these little ice cubes. Now what happens in our regular life is we make these ice cubes snowman bottoms. We pack snow around them, maybe up in the top of a hill, and we turn them into a snowball first with misplaced emotion. This is going to be important, so I'm going to do it slowly. Negative storyline.
Right.
And bad habits.
Right.
And actually, that seems judgmental, so I'd actually now call it a barrier to performance. And these would be worry, complaining, judging. Right. Okay? That's the snow. So if you have a team and you've identified, here's our obstacles, all the obstacles we're facing. I want you to take them down to the absolute most granular level that you can. Because cash flow is maybe too overwhelming. Well, it is overwhelming. Let's be honest, right? That's a regular emotion, but it doesn't actually require emotion. We need to deal with it.
Right.
And challenge each other, because the reason the adversity is the fear, right?
Right.
And we can't add and allow, and this is the emotional intelligence, and why I wish desperately people would have done this work 3 years ago. But we can't go back. We've got to figure it out today.
Sure.
We have to separate fear from the ice cubes.
Right.
Because
so there's room to talk about it, but we have to, by talking about it, we're still back to, we have an obstacle, guys, and each one of us is going to be reminding the other one about what those obstacles are. So even if I'm getting a little worrisome, Pascal is there with me to say, Rob, I respect it and I understand it, but we have to go and focus back over here.
Validate and focus. Validate and focus. Yes, this is scary. Yes, it's easy to get worried, but let's trust ourselves that we're going to find a way to figure this out. If we can isolate and we can stay safe from catching the actual virus, then we're going to get through this.
Right.
And it may be, or actually it's not even it may, it won't be pretty.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to offer ourselves self-forgiveness and know that not every day are we going to be able to be in a power play position.
I really appreciate this model. I do want to say for our listeners, there's no doubt that Allison is Canadian. She has chosen a snowman. So it's a very Canadian model. I like that, Allison.
So,
I suppose it could be,
so,
something else. Well, and the thing is that it's really easy to melt an ice cube, but if you only watch a W Network movie once in a while, you can't ever get rid of those snowmen, right? They'll stay through the spring.
so,
So,
so I have two questions. These are wonderful. And they have to do with things you've already mentioned. So the first one is around basically adversity and personal and with the team. So as a leader, um, how do you, I'm trying to choose the word carefully, um, influence or help people face adversity and acknowledge it? Because right now we have a spectrum of people. Some are facing it or living the adversity and letting themselves feel those feelings, and others are totally blocking them out. And that could be on your team. So how do you lead an exercise like this on your team if you have some that don't that choose to totally ignore it and then creates conflict within the team?
okay. So great insight. Let me just show you this, because the answer is not the same for every person.
Okay.
That's the challenge. So not only do you have to process your own emotions, tap into and understand how are you physically reacting and how do you put yourself in the best position? What storyline are you sharing? And what then your emotions follow after that. Okay. So let's look at so there's you, and I think we should even go that far into my resilience formula, but let's just hang on for a second. There's you, and then there's your team. So let's look at the different ways people will respond. The first is the victim. Now, a victim is their problems equals their identity. These are the people who it's all about them, and it's harder for them to see the rest of the world kind of going through this. Now, I'm going to actually read my notes on this, which is the same as what I do when I'm on stage, because I want to be sure to give you this model so you understand. So the victims are the ones who will complain more than they do. So for these people, when you're thinking about from a leadership perspective in this tough time, we need to put a cap on the complaining, because they will bring people into the vortex of just sort of suck the life out of, or any hope out of a situation. And I think we all go into this a little bit, especially when we're facing an adversity. It's very natural, and we can't stay there long. That's the key. We got to pull them out of it. And so this is where it takes, if I go back to the last model, like on the last page about the negative storyline, is as a leader, challenge the words you're using and the words your team is using to describe a situation. For example, if it's a regular day and somebody goes, "Oh my God, there's a disaster, it's a disaster," and they're in the other room, and you as an empathetic being are like, "Oh my gosh, is there an earthquake coming? Is there a new question, is there a pandemic coming? Is there, did somebody get hurt? Is the ambulance on the way?" This is the brain's interpretation of the word disaster. And you rush out, and somebody's like, "Oh, well, I spilled coffee on my shirt." The stress response is the same. So we want to look with our victims, we need to plug the rabbit hole so that we don't go into that vortex, right, of desperation and all of that. Validate and shift the focus. Okay, I understand, and then call it out for what it really is. Listen, I understand things are scary right now. Let's focus right now on what we can do. Another option is to allow a time frame to just go into the weeds. Like, you need to have a safe place to vent. Now, you want to vent up, not down, if it's you as the leader, but your team, you need to give them, "Listen, I understand. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to say absolutely every desperate, devastating thing that you can think of with this situation, and
Right.
just let it out." Because complaining, when it gets looped on a reel, or we don't allow the depth of the truth to come from it, that complaining will actually make a problem much, much, much worse. But venting should actually make us feel a little bit better. And it's a nuance between the two. So I actually believe, and I've got some friends, I've got my safe circle, and it's like, I just need a big cry. Give me 5 minutes to not interrupt me and not correct my language and let me just feel like the world is collapsing. Okay, and this is why it's so important to have our network, our shared advisors. I mean, the people in your group are so fortunate to have you, right? Like they need that opportunity, that place where they can be safe. But we can't allow them to stay there for too long. Okay, time limit, and then change the story. So the next piece here, I probably don't need to be doing this, is on a thing. Actually, you know what? I think I'm just going to stop the share, and I can just talk because you don't need to see the words. There are enough words there to matter. So the next one is the number outer. A word that's easier is maybe the avoider. And I got to tell you, this is my natural set point. This is me. This is how I cope with everything, unless I interrupt the pattern. So the avoider is the person who 3.5 weeks ago would have been showed up sick the day that you were going to do a review.
Right.
Okay. They'll say things like, "Oh, it is what it is," and like move on. They'll avoid the conflict if they can.
Right.
And it's like, you know, if you owe the tax man money, you're just not going to open up the envelope because maybe the bill's going to go away. Right? That's the avoider. That's the number outer. And I know this one, as I mentioned, it's my natural set point. It's how I would respond if I don't choose to be resilient. And the way to push this one and to inspire them is to really focus on what's like small wins. Let them get lost in a project, because this group will step up if they have something of meaning to do. So, for example, listen, can you do me a favor? Can you go and research every option we have available to us for funding? They'll kick into gear. So think about small little steps that can get them focused on the tasks. Now the reactor is the third way. And by the way, there are a lot more complicated models around this framework, and I just like to make it really, really simple for people so that they can, you know, go do the 12 different things. But right now, we just got to give you something to get it done. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the reactor is the person who, again, 3.5 weeks ago, would have used busy as their badge of honor. Mm-hmm. Constantly reacting to external forces. And I think this is where a lot of professionals live. And I think the biggest risk right now for this professional is that they don't have that external stimulation to get lost in. They're the people when, you know, the validation comes from being busy and being needed. They're probably sometimes the people who would complain about being busy, but they're the one who said yes to everything in the first place.
Right.
Right. And so the risk here is that they're going to be so spinning in so many directions and reacting to the news every day that they may not ever get anything done, or they're really going to struggle through this process emotionally because they're not going to deal with anything emotional. They're not going to feel the feels. Totally going to use that now. I think it's ridiculous, but I will. And my poor mom will be like, grammatically, Allison, that is not correct. That's okay. So this reactive person is like almost, I think, going to be the most profoundly changed when we come out the other side of this. I'm actually most excited for this person, because this is going to force them to go in, to not deflect, right? To not react, but to sit and go, okay, the path I'm on. And, you know, when we think about the tasks, the obstacles, and the adversity, we got to get clear about what kind of a path do we want to create on the other side.
So in terms of this person, the person who, and I think they probably found they got energy from being reactive. Being busy it can be rather addictive too.
Yeah.
So, so right now, they might actually still default into that, of course, because they're seeing a lot of changes happening in their business. Obviously, for most people, it feels it's an adversity right now that's going on. For some, it might not be, and their first modus operandi is going to be, I'm just going to go and do what I've always done. So we want to talk to those leaders right now and be able to ensure that there's other leaders with them, around them, that are reminding them that this is the time to lead differently. So would that be fair to say there is different leadership traits now that are really needed, that maybe we probably knew, as you said, it would have been nice if people did their homework 3 years ago when we all did this, but we certainly weren't pushed to the abyss, which we feel we're pushed now. And these leadership traits are really critical. So I actually said to somebody this week, and so I had mentioned you to another leader, and I said, I know somebody who is teaching what I think might be the most important leadership trait right now, and it probably will stay. They asked me what it was, and I said, it's resilience. And I tried to explain how it shows up. And I didn't have your model. I wish I had your model. I didn't have the snowman. It would have been nice too. But I explained in my conversations with you, there's something with what Allison is saying right now that we're all going to go, it's true. How do I engage this immediately? So for the leaders out there right now watching this, the start of the homework is write down the 3 areas to start with: the adversity and the obstacle and the task. Do it professionally and do it personally. Share it as well probably with your loved ones and with your team as well.
Yes.
And is there then check-ins? Do we take it and then say, where are we in a week from now?
I think it's actually more fluid than that. I think it's a daily. I think it becomes your working model. So at the risk of sharing 4 models that I've created, the overarching one on resilience is this. And this is, I think, what you're looking for in the answer to your question. Situational awareness, self-awareness, solution activation. In that order.
Right.
Because if we try to activate a solution without understanding first how we're reacting physically, emotionally, mentally, if we are not aware, are we trying to find a solution to a task, an obstacle, or an adversity? Are we trying to figure out how to efficiently get down that path, or are we trying to jump over a log, or are we trying to walk on a sinkhole on air, but we're actually about to sink? Then the solution we activate won't matter. And so,
we'll be fixing the wrong thing.
What's that?
We'll be working or fixing the wrong thing.
Yes.
We're not dealing with what we need to.
Right. So the situational awareness, write it down, get clear with your team, do it with your family. Like, even at a family level, let's think about this. There are families who have not spent this much time physically together in potentially since their children were 5 years old.
Right.
And if you have teenagers, you're in for a rude awakening, right? Or moms and dads who have spent their entire weekend of their life being cruise directors for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, adversity, COVID-19. Potential adversity, we may all end up divorced and I may give up my children. That's unbelievable. Right? But the obstacles from that are, how are we going to deal with some emotional outbursts that are going to be very, very, very natural in the confined space? How are we going to find new ways to stimulate our brain and to be sure that we're keeping the conversation as positive as it can be, right? what are some of the activities we can do? How can we get some alone time when we're all together?
Mm-hmm.
Those become the next level obstacles. Do you see how powerful this can be when we sit down together and we start mapping it out?
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, to this person, go research some ways that we can do some family games. You know,
Right.
just when everybody choose their private protected place in the house, where if you're sitting there and you have headphones on, it means I really just need some alone time.
Right.
Right? It's getting creative with those pieces. Those become the tasks. That's where your control comes from.
Makes sense.
So
Does that help? So like in terms of like, what do I do now? The answer is, I don't have a clue. But the first thing you can do is figure out what are the things you need to solve within the greater issue of COVID-19. Because you can't solve that. The only thing you can do with regards to COVID-19 is keep yourself and your family safe by not leaving your home.
So how important is, well, you talked about a little earlier in terms of those who are in groups, but community in a world where we're physically isolated, but we could virtually connect. But how important is it for everyone to remember the importance of community? Can you talk about community in terms of resilience versus the tendency to want to self-isolate both, physically, emotionally, and mentally?
I think we are headed for a mental health crisis that of epic proportions, because every tendency we have will be magnified in this time of an adversity. Any adversity, it's magnified. You get a cancer diagnosis, it's magnified. Get a somebody dies, it's magnified. So how we react, that model of how we react, magnified. So having the people, and one of the things I did when I was at home, and 2 to 5 hours of functionality. So I went out and I still was able to go to parties and things like that. The difference now is nobody gets to go to any of those things, right? So there's no release. Like even I love going to the theater, like the movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that, right? And so a couple of times I've been like, oh, I feel like going to a movie, and then going, oh, I can't go to a movie. And that's really hard. So I think self-awareness, we have to recognize that. But also, so back then what I did was I made a list of 50 people, because sometimes, we kind of forget who our friends are. We get so caught up in our lives, we forget. And then like a year goes by and we're like, oh, I haven't talked to, so-and-so for a while. So one of the tasks you could do as a family is write down, who are all the people who I'd love to say hello to? Who are the people who you run into on the street, and 3.5 weeks ago, you probably said, hey, you know what? When the weather turns, we should play golf. Or we should grab that dinner or that drink or that go to the theater or do like we used to do. Those are the people now that I'm going to ask you to go out and meet with. And when you do make that connection, and I mean that virtually, meet with them virtually. When you do make that connection, I think what I'm really seeing out there is that people are going deeper, faster.
Mm. Yeah.
This is not the time to be like, oh yeah, everything's great, busy, good. Yeah, hey, we should do lunch when we're allowed out of the house. This is the time to be like, how are you doing? And reach out to people. I know it maybe sounds ridiculous, but like everybody's nails who gets their nails done in the next 3.5 weeks, we're going to have a new, people should start taking pictures of here's how it was before COVID-19 and a month from now, which is such a silly thing. But I'll tell you, the guy who owns my nail salon, I reached out to him with phone calls today. I said, hey, Mike, listen. He's like, hey, Allie, I can't do your nail. I'm like, I know that. I'm just calling to see how you're doing. Are you okay? And I don't think anybody thought to call him. Maybe his immediate friends. I've reached out to some speaker people who I know, whose businesses have blown up, I'm sure, like mine did, and just said, hey, how are you? But it can't be a BS, hey, how are you? You got to be ready to say, I'm here to listen. And be that. It's the only way we're going to do this.
Your your work, your models, are really, first of all, I think they're well thought out, they're meaningful, and they're extremely critical right now. I really, you and I have spoken before a few times, but I didn't know the models, and I'm very speaking very personally right now about how I want to internalize this and work with this. So as much as, and I tell this to my own family, for about 12 hours a day, Pascal and I are doing what we see here. We're working with our own clients, we're connecting with people, but we're online, and I'm making sure that I'm trying to be that strong person, of course. But every one of us always has that other place sometimes where, you unfortunately, if you just consume a little too much news, so I'm really trying to not do that right now. It's for every positive story, there's 12 negatives, and that's the reality well before this, and maybe we'll change that as we go through this. But right now, there are certain things I think we need to do that you've given us some strong tips on about. We can control a lot more than we think, even if we can't control COVID-19. And that's really, like, I'm so happy that you've taken the time today, Allison. This is great.
Absolutely. This is wonderful information. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for sharing, taking the time with everything that's going on in all our lives, to take the time of your life right now to share with everyone.
Well, and I think this is a place where people can step into service. And I am here to offer these concepts. Like, in many ways, I've been a bit of a hidden secret. Like, my clients know about this.
Right.
And I've called them and said, hey, free, what can I do to serve you? Right? Because at the end of the day, how we show up in a time of crisis will be how we are judged in the good times. And so if my rules right now is that if your business is in trouble and you don't have a budget to pay me and this will help your team, I'm going to do it for you. No problem. And if you have a budget and you have a reserve, I will also do it for you. And I will gladly accept
Absolutely.
that. Because I think right now this is about humanity getting through something that none of us have ever gone through. And each of us can play our part. And it's not even big. Like, I've spent years developing these models, and now I think I truly believe, and so I'm really grateful you said that, Rob. I believe they can help people. And so for me to sit on them and say, no, paid, or, would be absolutely unethical in my belief system for me. And so I'm going to step up if I can do a tiny little part, but every one of us can do a tiny little part. Smile, listen, change the story, challenge the negative storylines, turn off the news, put it into small doses, protect yourself.